I'd like to welcome you back to another episode of During Bible Study Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Kitts. Today we're going to talk about Egypt. Now, Egypt is mentioned in the Hebrew Bible more than 700 times, and it's a reference another 25 times in the New Testament, making it the most frequent mentioned place outside of Canaan land in the Bible. Biblical Egypt serves both as a refuge and a threat to God's people in the Old Testament and the New Testament times. From Abraham to Jesus, the prophets, patriarchs, and the people that continuously are connected to the place called Egypt. And on more than one occasion, the chosen of God would dwell in Egypt or near it. As most of the places that we read about in the Bible, they have many different names. The name Egypt is fairly consistent, but it's also been known by other names. Mizraim is another one. It's the original name given to Egypt in the Hebrew Old Testament. Many Bibles have a footnote next to the name Mizraim explaining that it meant Egypt. I was wondering how far was the land of Goshen from Egypt. So miles based on distance, it's 6,517.8 miles. Now Goshen is a city that is right next to Egypt, next to the Nile Delta River. The land of Goshen is named in the Hebrew Bible as a place in Egypt that was given to the Hebrew by the Pharaoh of Joseph. You know, the Joseph, the coat of many colors, the second in charge of all of Egypt. When the famine came, he brought all of the chosen people to closer to him so he could take care of them. And that was in Genesis 45. Now, Goshen is where they sold themselves into slavery. And it's the same place that Moses led them out of in the book of Exodus. Many stories about Egypt are all through the Bible. One of the greatest prophets of the Old Testament, Moses, was called up out of Egypt. And Joseph, from whom so many of us have claimed descendants, performed this greatest service to God and to the people in that land. The emphasis of the Bible consistently falls not on the Egyptians as the people, but as Egypt as a place. Only rarely are individuals native to Egypt mentioned throughout the Bible by name. For example, we see it in Genesis 41:50, 2 Kings 23:29, and Jeremiah 44:30. Thus, when in later Christian scriptures, Egypt is usually used as a symbol of spiritual bondage. We note that the writers use this place as a symbol that's understood by the Jews and not charged against the people. In the book of Revelations, for instance, Egypt is equal to Sodom and Gomorrah, and both are used as names or symbols for the wickedness Jerusalem in the latter days would be, and that's Revelations 11 and 8. But this use of Egypt only particularly reflects the attitudes of the ancient Israelites towards this place. While it often is a place of testing and bondage, it is also a frequent haven for those that are in trouble. We agree with the idea that it's more than a place that is referenced to instead of the people that dwell there. Just like in your own town that you live in today, there's all sorts of good and bad stuff you can say about it. The town has nothing to do for the youth, or there's not enough roads for the cars there. Why is there only one way in and only one way out of this place? Can they not do something about this? And they can't do something about that. They know who's doing the bad. Why don't they go get them? All sorts of things. We can go on and on. When you look at how nice a town is, how much lake access that we have in our particular place, We have a mountain ridge that is constantly changing colors, and it's beautiful. And it protects us from a lot of storms that would come in and decimate us. We have a low crime rate, and we're close to the interstate. There's many different good things that we can claim. Within moments, 5 minutes, you can be in a body of water somewhere. Get your fishing line out. You see, you can find good in every place, but you can also find evil and bad in the very same spot, same place. This is just like Egypt, and it was like in our Bible times for our heroes. For Abraham and Sarah, Egypt consistently was a place of refuge from a famine that raged at the time that they arrived in Canaan, back in Genesis 12 and 10. Interestingly, whilst Abraham and Sarah enjoyed respite from Canaan's drought in Egypt, they visited, and it provided Sarah with one of the most difficult trials. Most are already familiar with the story of Sarah posing as Abraham's sister, because he said to in Genesis 12, 11, and 15. Even though Abraham later insisted that Sarah was his sister through a different father, but not his mother. So many students have felt confusion on this explanation. It is not only until the discovery of ancient Hura legal texts at the site of Nazu, the city of Ashur, the capital of the ancient Assyria, we have attained a clearer background for this incident. The Hurans were people that flourished about the time that Abraham was alive, and later on. Their kingdom included the land of Haran, in which Abraham and Sarah lived for a number of years before moving to Canaan. Interestingly, only the story dealing with Sarah and Rebekah do we find in their claim made that the wife was also the sister to her husband. Rebekah, like Sarah, spent her youth growing up in Haran, no doubt with contact of the Haranians. The contact is important. When we learn about the Haran law, women were frequently adopted as sisters by their husbands, either before or during the marriage ceremony. Such a dual status, both wife and sister, are important consequences for the woman. It guaranteed to her special legal and social protections and the opportunities which were simply not available to women in any other culture in the Near East. Because Sarah lived within the Haran culture for a number of years, it was not likely that she enjoyed the status in her marriage, the status common to the Haranians. Therefore, Abraham claimed that Sarah was his sister upon their entry into the land of Egypt is not as far-fetched as we could think. Further, it is possible that Terah, Abraham's father, also adopted Sarah before her marriage to Abraham, and that is that this meaning of the passage in Genesis 20 and 12. This particular practice on the part of the prospective father-in-law is documented in the Nuza tablets. It talks about the wife-sister motive in the patriarch narratives. In Genesis, Abraham is said to have insisted that Sarah was his sister because he feared for his life. The incident is clarified in the book of Abraham, where we learn it is revealed that Abraham said that Sarah would maintain that she was his sister. This places a burden on Sarah. Would she risk her own rights as a wife in order to preserve the life of her husband, as the Lord had asked? Indeed, Sarah's visit to Egypt became a period of intense trial for her. She was very beautiful, and the Pharaoh liked her, brought her into his harem. Even the Lord had protected her from the Pharaoh's intent to make her his wife. The protection was also on her virtue. The Pharaoh was nevertheless allowed to take her into his household. We see then that Egypt represents at the same time of a haven or a protection place from the famine, it was also a place of testing for Sarah and Abraham. For Joseph, coat of many colors guy, also Egypt serves two purposes and has opposite functions. On one hand, it formed true provisions for him and his family, since there was able to store up goods for the famine that was to hit. God had helped him, revealed it to him. On the other hand, Egypt became a refuge for his brothers that wanted to kill him. They wanted to get rid of him. They even threw him in a pit and sold him into slavery. They thought they were done with this guy. But it also was a place of redemption. So perhaps here Joseph would be more likely to succeed or fail on his own merits rather than succumb to the contrary winds of his father's favoritism and his brother's hatred and repression. We must bear in mind that Egypt has a transformer of cultures. Most likely the culture that came into contact with Egypt, when you went there, you would either adapt to that or you would change its culture. It's stirring, therefore, to find exceptions in Abraham and Sarah, who departed Egypt with their loyalty to God intact. They didn't succumb to the Egyptian ways. But they were adults and already refined in their experiences. They had already experienced what God had for them, and they already went through some things before they were tempted. Now, to say that the young Joseph resisted all the enticements of Egypt's culture in the same way that his grandparents had is to pay a great tribute to the young man Joseph, that he stood firm and stayed with God. He had been betrayed, sold by his brothers. He was alone in a strange land, lied on. He always tried to do the right thing and hold true, even was in jail for 3 years. Yet the teenage Joseph chose to remain true to his teachings of the scriptures and true to God.
What's up, guys? Steve here with the Balance of Gray podcast. Do you ever feel like sermons skip the chapters you're living in?
What?
Like church turned into a TED Talk after a concert? Well, at the Balance of Gray, we ask real questions, wrestle with real doubts, and yeah, we leave room for some laughs along the way.
Ooh.
But make no mistake, prophecies are unfolding, and this isn't dress rehearsal. It's the final act. The gospel isn't a vibe, it's a rescue plan. And lukewarm doesn't cut it. From scientific proof to spiritual warfare, this is where faith is not blind. Search The Balance of Gray wherever you get your podcast and hit follow now. That's The Balance of Gray podcast. I'll see you soon.
Phenomenon is what it is.
So let's talk about the deliverance of the children of Israel. When the family or tribes of Jacob went to Egypt, they were given the land of Goshen to settle in, which is 6,000 some miles from Egypt, but it was close. But there was a lot of the chosen people. The children of Israel that settled in Goshen for 430 years had grown from a clan of 70 or so into a great nation of over 6,000, and some say 1 million. The Bible notes that the land of Goshen was fertile and suited for flocks and livestock. Joseph, in fact, advised his brothers to tell Pharaoh that they were shepherds in order to settle in Goshen, since shepherds were abhorrent to Egypt. The family of Jacob, Egypt became a place of refuge from a severe famine that hit all of the land. By the end of the book of Genesis, Egypt is portrayed as a land of plenty, while Canaan, tortured by drought, was hostile to human survival. The promised land had turned, what it did, to where you wouldn't want to live in it. But the refuge turned to bondage when the descendants of Jacob in the book of Exodus came to be held captive by Pharaoh's decree. When you live somewhere and you have to pay taxes and do things, if you can't pay the taxes according to the Egyptians, people would have to sell their service to the city for taking care of them. So that's how a lot of the objects, the buildings, and the upgrades of Egypt happened, because the skilled workers that were the Israelites, they were able to build and to construct great feats that's still around today. Because they were in bondage, they had to do it, but they were skilled no less. Now suddenly, there's a picture change here in Exodus 3 and 8. Egypt now represented loathsome solitudes for the Hebrew children, while Canaan was a characteristic of a land that was flowing with milk and honey. In a sense, the land of Egypt represented not only a place of testing for the Israelites, but it was a place where they saw Jehovah in the context with the false gods of Pharaoh. Now, I did an episode on the gods of Egypt. Many gods they had. They had gods for everything. And they worshiped each god according to whatever they wanted and whatever they needed. So the Hebrew children had one god that traveled with them. The Egyptians had many gods that never traveled. They stayed where they were. So if you went to a new place, you would have to find out where the new god dwelled at, and then go find that god and worship him wherever. So Exodus, we talk about it, is one of the greatest traumas of the human deliverance that's ever told. It is not just a mere story of one person escaping from the power of another, but it's a chronicle of the struggles for supremacy between the Pharaoh, the idolatrous gods of Egypt, and then the glory of God of the Hebrews. Interestingly, the Bible speaks of Jehovah as coming physically into Egypt in order to battle Pharaoh's gods, which were not gods at all, and to lead the people into another land. As a result of the contest between Jehovah and Egyptians' deities, it underscores the idea that God of the Hebrews was a universal God, that he was not limited by international boundaries. Generally speaking, deities in the ancient world were conceived to be limited to territories of the people who worshiped them. When one crossed into another frontier or another place, one also passed from one territory of that god to another territory of a new god. The story of Naaman illustrates this. Naaman came to Elijah seeking a cure for his leprosy. After he was freed from the disease, he asked Elijah's permission to take 2 donkey loads of earth back to Syria so that he could worship the Lord Jehovah on Jehovah's own ground. And we see that in 2 Kings 5. He was under the understanding that God lived in one spot. Elisha had told him that God is everywhere. He's inside you. You take him wherever you go. And that's hard for some people that have been raised otherwise to understand. The last importance of the Lord's deliverance of the Hebrew from the bondage was recalled again and again in their oath and prayers. The phrase, "the Lord liveth," that brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, from Jeremiah 16:14. The Lord told Jeremiah that only one other act would be as great and memorious when, as the exalted Lord, he would gather up his people for the last time. On that occasion, the new phrase would be introduced that would characterize the Lord and that work. And that's Jeremiah 16:15. Jeroboam is the next biblical personage whose career was affected positively by Egypt. We can recall the story of how Ayah, the prophet, met Jeroboam, and while symbolically tearing his cloak into 12 pieces, prophesied that Jeroboam would rule over the northern tribes. And that's 1 Kings 11:29 through 39. Jeroboam, at the time, was serving as a foreman in the public works sector of Solomon's administration. Naturally, Solomon was alarmed by the prophecy and sought Jeroboam's life. Jeroboam fled to Egypt until the death of Solomon. In this case, Egypt formed a sanctuary for the refuge Jeroboam. Of the later prophets, Jeremiah had most to do with Egypt. Late in his life, he was taken by force into Egypt, where he apparently lived out the rest of his life. Early in his ministry, Jeremiah had insisted that the kingdom of Judah would bow to the yoke of Babylon and not align itself with Egypt. This anti-Egypt and pro-Babylonian position did not find adherents amongst the leaders of Judah. As a result, of course, they were disastrous for Jerusalem and the surrounding country. When Jeremiah was forcibly kidnapped into Egypt by the Jews who had assassinated Nebuchadnezzar's governor, Gedaliah, it appeared that Egypt would again be the place for safety. But Jeremiah made it clear to his Jewish captors that it would not be so. In chapter 44, he addressed all Jews living in Egypt, prophesying that rather than a shelter from the troubles, Egypt would be for them a place of punishment. The Jews in Egypt would be so thoroughly destroyed, he said, that only a small number would return to the land of Judah. And that is Jeremiah 44:28. Finally, Jeremiah prophesied the scourge of the sword would be so great that Pharaoh himself would fall upon it. Now, this prophecy was fulfilled in 525 BC when the Persians overran Egypt. So there's a Elephantine temple. Contemporary to Jeremiah was a military colony of the Jews on Elephantine, a small granite island on the Nile River adjacent to the city of Aswan. Though these Jews were serving as mercenary soldiers for the Pharaoh, they nevertheless wished to continue their religious worship. According to the archaeologists that excavated the site, it shows that they had built a temple. This temple flourished and served the Jewish colony until it was destroyed in 411 BC by the Egyptians riding against the Jewish god in favor of the god Kulam. We learn from this existence that the Elephantine temple at least had some Jews of that period regarded Egypt as their home. With their own temple, even though they may have been apostolic, they would no longer have to look to Jerusalem as the spiritual center of their religion. That center instead was right there in Egypt with them. Now, Egypt served as a refuge for the Israelites one final time in the Bible. That occurred when it was the baby Jesus. When Jesus and his parents fled Bethlehem to Egypt, we see that in Matthew 2:13-14, it is estimated that up to 1 million Jews lived in the city of Alexandria. But in the tradition that have grown up in the Egypt concerning the flight of the Holy Family, it is assumed that Joseph and Mary avoided popular areas, especially those which large numbers of Jews that had lived there. The biblical records said nothing about where Joseph had led his family, but where the Bible has left off, traditional stories will continue. Joseph is said to have led his family into the delta about midway between the modern cities of Port Said and Susa. They wound their way through the delta, making a number of stops. At most every resting place or stop, a miraculous event is reported to have occurred, according to legends. The Holy Family's first stop was the town of Besta, modern city of Zagazig. Later, according to the local stories, the family arrived in the delta known as Belbiz. Then they arrived at the Roman fortress in Babylon, which was controlling the Nile River traffic, at the place south of the modern-day Cairo. Over a cave there, in which the family had believed to stayed in, was later built a church of St. Sergius. After a brief stay in the cave within the large Roman fort, the family is said to have sailed from the Upper Egypt, from the spot where the Church of the Holy Virgin in Madad now stands. Their long trip, mostly by boat and then partly by foot, took them eventually to the Quasma Mountains. It is believed that the Holy Family lived there in a cave, and in this cave that the angel had said to them and appeared to Joseph, instructed him to take the child and Mary back to their home. And this is Matthew 2:19 and 20. None of the details of the journey of the Holy Family can be confirmed by historical evidence. We do know, however, that the Holy Family did go to Egypt, and in fact has been a source of pride and awe for the members of the Coptic Orthodox Church, descending from the original Egyptian Christians. The theme of the flight of the Holy Family has been a favorite of the Coptic Church storytellers and artists, although it is prominence that it did not emerge on the large scale of the Coptic art until the 18th century. From this belief, it reviews that it is apparent that Egypt plays an enormous role in waxing and waning fortunes in the ancient Hebrews from the time of Abraham until the time of Jesus. Along with the other lands in the area, the Lord used Egypt to test and train and preserve his people. We have learned that the first Egypt was a place to get away from famine, and then it turned into a place of giving up your rights, which was slavery. Be careful who you place your trust in. Be careful where you go. Be careful where you plant your roots. Today we can read and learn about being strangers in a strange land. We need to know that heaven is our home and not this earth. Different places you can set your feet, but put your heart in heaven. Well, that's my message for today. Thank you for joining me on this episode of During Bible Study Podcast. I've been your host, Steve Kitts. I'm just trying to give you some information that you can use to better your life, better your walk with God. Share this with others, and I'll see you next pod. God bless. I want to take a minute to talk to you about Buzzsprout. Today is a great day to start your own podcast. Whether you're looking for a new market or a channel, may I suggest that you share your thoughts and your ideas with the world. And it's just so fun to have a talk show. Podcasting is very easy, inexpensive, and a fun way to expand your reach online. Buzzsprout is hands down the easiest and best way to launch, promote, and track your podcast. Your show can be online and listed in major podcast directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and many more within minutes of finishing each recording. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners, and a team that they have at Buzzsprout is passionate in helping you succeed. They want you to succeed. Join with over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. Let's go ahead and create something together. God bless you.